Thank the Lord, I thought this day would never come. So hello, my name is Reegan and welcome back to my mini reviews, and today we're going to be covering season 2 of the classic Who era. It's worth noting straight off the bat that I had numerous issues with getting this all sorted, and I had an error behind the camera which collapsed. Putting all the equipment together was a faff, and I've actually recorded already half of this episode before I realised that my microphone wasn't recording anything, which was just great. So I guess backtracking for me a bit. So it's worth noting straight off the bat that much like the first season, there are episodes missing or part of the serials missing on BritBox, and I dare say the same applies to BBC iPlayer. So I think it's only 35 of the 39 episodes that I guess are listed are available. And it's worth noting straight off the bat also that my favourite episode was Planet of Giants. Kind of doubling back first of all though to what I was saying last week about the issues around filming and how a lot of actors and actresses, not just William Hartnell, kind of stuttered through their lines at times. It became more apparent the more research that I did that these issues could have also been down to the way that they filmed it, especially in studio where they had multiple cameras and they would live cut between shots, meaning I'm guessing that they were it was preferable that they would use a single take as opposed to go back and refilming stuff. But yeah, so my favourite episode or serial within this season was Planet of Giants, and it's such a simple concept where the Tardis gets shrunk down, and to those who are familiar with New Who, this won't be a foreign concept to you, because something similar happened to Peter Capaldi's TARDIS, where his TARDIS got shrunk. But unlike this serial, when Peter's TARDIS got shrunk, he, to everyone outside of the TARDIS, still appeared at the same size, where it was like a head kind of peeking through and a hand. Whereas in this serial, when the TARDIS gets shrunk, everyone who comes out of it is the size or slightly larger than ants. And it's such a simple concept to take what then became quite a simple set, where it's a garden and a house, can be a completely different environment for those at that size. The one bizarre part of it was that everyone who was normal size in the real world was going through some kind of turmoil over, if I'm remembering correctly, like a pesticide that turned out it was killing more than just the pests that it intended to. It became very mafia based very quickly, because the one who was intending to release this information to the public ended up getting shot. There's a really fun moment with a cat, and they all, very similar to Jurassic Park, they all have to kind of freeze and then the cat kind of leaves them alone. One thing that I did think was rather an amusing concept, and it's no discredit to William Hartnell, but it lends to some disbelief, where there's a scene where him and Susan have to climb up a drain pipe in order to get into the house, and he somehow manages it. But you've got in the back of your head, or at least I did, that it should have almost been Matt Smith emerging from that. The amount of energy and physical exertion that would have taken probably would have unfortunately finished that particular Doctor off. But yeah, the props that they used were quite simple. These kind of, I guess, almost like papier-mâché meshes of ants and worms and things like that. And there was a certain amount of time where you were learning that this wasn't perhaps an alien planet. This was just our planet, but where they've been miniaturized. And yeah, just a really fascinating concept, and I hope in a way with the new technology available to Doctor Who now, especially now with, I guess, Disney's semi-partnership with the BBC, that we may see a vastly improved version of this, because it's so simple but it's so effective and so fun to see the characters interact with that environment. We do get another Dalek story, and it is what the second part of the standalone film was based on, and it's the Dalek invasion of Earth that's already happened. When the crew land, they find this completely different version of Earth and London. But the episode starts off really darkly, where you've got what you later learn to be a Robo-Man just casually walk into the Thames and kill themselves, which is something. It's worth noting that the standalone film was it kind of cheered. It went for a far more cheery and upbeat approach. Don't get me wrong, there were still some dark moments, and the Daleks were still quite terrifying for that motion picture in color, but this one didn't pull any punches. It straight up showed suicide straight away. I'm going to outright say that I don't like the version of these Daleks that we see, as opposed to the ones that we first see in the second serial of William Hartnell's run. The voices are different, and I don't like them. They still sound Dalek-y, but they just don't sound right. I don't know whether the difference was made because of the fact that these Daleks run slightly differently. They have like a circular panel on their back, and I don't know if it's said during the episode, but I imagine that there must be some kind of linking reason for this as to how then the Daleks can travel on concrete and things like that, where they originally needed to run on floors where they had like access to static electricity. It's a fairly fun run, but one notable point for me at least was I got my first emotional moment during the watch through of this classic Who era, and it was the departure of Susan, the Doctor's granddaughter, and I did kind of choke up a bit, and I think there were two reasons for that. One, because it was quite nicely acted out, but the second being the Adventures in Time and Space film mini documentary thing that was shot a lot later, that kind of depicted William Hartnell's relationship with this actress and how she was wanting to go on to do bigger and better things, but he was very sad to see her departure. And I think the more companions that have been introduced since, the less, and again, I don't think it's any discredit to Hartnell at all, but the less interested, or I guess it's not so much a nice dynamic between him and the companions. I mean, fair to say that, and this has been said with several other YouTube channels, that the last set of companions are the worst and the least interesting in William Hartnell's run. That is skipping slightly ahead, and I suppose I can't go back now and act like I don't know, but at the point of filming I have done season 2, season 3, all the missing episodes from Hartnell's run, and I'm quite far into season 4 now. Again, sorry, scheduling issues, I guess, with filming these, but we are mainly going to be focusing on season 2. So the Web Planet, I didn't enjoy this serial. I think the thing that really puts me off old Who is the use of really shrill noises, and they're constant, and the ant creatures, they had this kind of like beeping sound that they would make, and it became really grating really quickly. I suppose I'm experiencing these episodes completely differently to how they were aired, because they would have been twice a week or once a week, and you've got then that entire time to get over that long exposure to the same noise. But I don't have that, and yeah, it became really grating, and it almost felt like some of those effects, the practical costumes were being reused from Planet of Giants. But an interesting concept. It did go on too long. I found it quite impressive though when the kind of bee people would take off, and you could barely see the ropes and like the landing and stuff like that. That all looked quite impressive, and I imagine they had quite a large studio, almost like aircraft hangar, to film that in, just so they could get the height. Because from an adventure in time and space, the comment was made that the studio that they filmed the TARDIS scenes in was tiny. So I imagine that perhaps the second season and the success of that lent for an access of a larger studio. But yeah, it's not my favorite serial in this season. But we do get another Dalek story. And this one's slightly more interesting than the last. It's kind of like a chase through time. So it appears that the Daleks have constructed their own time machine. Now, the mind boggles as to why they've never done it again, and to whether it's like part of a captured TARDIS that they've broken down and reconstructed. It's essentially just like a large grey cube that they fly around in, unlike the TARDISes that haven't yet been adapted to blend in, where they're a silver cylinder. This is just a grey cube. But they land in a load of different locations. Like, we get a scene where they land on the top of the Empire State Building, and we get this very over-the-top American actor who experiences the different time machines materializing and dematerializing, and reacting in disbelief to that, and just thinking that it's done like almost like a live movie where it's just done with mirrors and things like that. But some points that I took away from that serial was that it was particularly amusing to see the Daleks land on, I'm guessing like it's I think the ship was actually set, it was a Mayflower, I think. I think there may be the fact that they shot the camera on it, and it is to my detriment that I haven't done this research prior to this recording, but it's possible that there is some significance to that ship, or at least that's what I took away from it. And it was slightly amusing to see a Dalek speed up on deck and I guess hit like a slippery patch and just topple over the side. Although I will say that as a Dalek fan, I've never been that ecstatic when the Daleks are made to look a bit foolish, and this is one of those moments. But another particularly intriguing moment is when they land in like a great mansion house, and you quickly realize that they're dipping into the Frankenstein and Dracula mythos, where you've got a physical depiction of Frankenstein's monster and Dracula himself. Interestingly, the Daleks can't kill Dracula, which becomes even more interesting when you realize that this isn't in fact, because the Doctor speculates that they somehow landed in the realm that's created within thought, and any like stories create their own realms that the TARDIS physically can land in, which is an insanely cool idea, and as far as I can tell has never once been explored since then. But it turns out that's not the case, and they've landed in like a sold out and closed down amusement park, but Dracula still can't be killed by the Daleks, so he's not an actor. So I don't know what it was trying to say with that last shot, but interesting to see. I guess that part of the mythos and Warner Brothers dark universe, and it's I suppose it's a shame. As far as I can tell, thus far we haven't seen anything like that since. I suppose we've had werewolves and things like that, but it was just interesting to see a humanoid that was so unfazed by the Daleks. So as far as I can tell, season 2 ends with a series of episodes that has, I think it's called The Time Meddler, and it focuses on a time traveler, I think simply known as the Monk, or the Mischievous Monk. Long and the short of it is, it's just a very simple Friar Tuck-esque depiction of a monk. But you learn further into the episodes that he has his own TARDIS, and it's disguised as like a sarcophagus that has a smaller entrance that you kind of have to crawl through in order to get into the main control room. And the Doctor ends up defeating... Well, actually, we're getting ahead of ourselves. So what the Time Meddler does is he goes back in time, and as the name would very much suggest, he alters pivotal moments in time and essentially just watches the history change, I guess. And he's also got within his TARDIS a collection of famous artifacts that he collects along the way. But the way that the First Doctor defeats him is that he miniaturizes his TARDIS and leaves him stranded in 1066. Now, I know that it's probably not this simple, because I don't believe that people like Russell T Davies would have overlooked this, because, you know, the fact that he brought that back, the Toymaker, a character that was last and only ever seen in season 3 of Old Who, I don't think he would have forgotten about the monk and the potential of bringing him back. And let's face it, the Master has got out of far trickier situations, death including, and come back. And I find it interesting, but also slightly befuddling that the monk hasn't come back. Maybe there's some research that needs to be done into that, because long and the short of it is that there has been some research done into a character that lots of fans reckon will be reoccurring. Like, there was talk about her coming back as recently as the character Mrs. Flood, and Mrs. Flood ending up being this character, but that character being the Rani. Now, the way that characters, monsters, and things like that work in Doctor Who is that those who came up with the idea own the rights to it. It's not necessarily the studio, it's not the BBC that have the rights to it. Although they have the rights to Doctor Who as a property, they don't have the rights to the individual things. So there's a contract that exists, and I can't remember the name of the household, but there's a contract that exists that says that the Daleks must appear at least once every season, or at least that's what I've heard. But the household that owns the Rani, they just can't get in contact with it, and I guess the original creators that come out with it have passed away, and they just can't get in contact with the family that would, I guess, now own that licensing, and that's the reason why she hasn't come back, or at least that's the crux that they've hit in the effort to bring her back. So I don't know whether a similar issue exists with the monk. But he's a really interesting concept as a Time Lord, because he's not out there to create chaos as such, or at least that's not what I got away from the episode. It's more that he's just creating this alternate reality and, I guess, perceiving it, watching it play out differently. He would be a really interesting character to see in league with the Trickster Brigade, because you could argue that him wanting to change history aligns with their want to change history, just so long as it has chaotic effects and they then have something to feed off of. But I don't know if we'll ever see it. Personal plea to Russell T Davies, it would be interesting if we did see him again. And I don't know whether fans might argue that it's been very recently that we've seen him do something similar, aka with the Toymaker, and it may be a bit much to see loads of old Who reoccurring characters, but you know, we didn't exactly need to look back into the Toymaker. He gave us that very simple flashback so that we knew that he was part of the Doctor's past, and something similar could be done with the monk. Or you could just not address it, and it could just be a time-traveling individual who likes to change history and things like that. And there's so many different points in history that have already been seen in Doctor Who that would be so interesting to see changed. Maybe that's something that needs to be talked about in a Doctor Who episode. I'd love to sit down with some of the hosts of that and just kind of discuss this as a premise, because it's interesting to see what kind of stories could be come up with. And I don't often come away from an old Who episode wanting to see more of those particular characters, but the monk is definitely one that I'd like to see more. Also fairly ingenious that and I suppose very early alluding to the Doctor's dislike for firearms, where he claims that he's got a Winchester rifle pointed at the monk's back, but then when there's a bit of a struggle, he turns around, he finds it just to be a long stick. No, that's just a nice kind of early side to the Doctor's dislike for anything to do with firearms. But all in all, it was a far more enjoyable season to watch, and there have been quite a few new companions that have joined. I don't remember all of their names, because I think Susan's the one that I took away most, and then you got Barbara and Chesterton. But that's also a point. Barbara and Chesterton. So after the Dalek debacle with the time machine, they used, because they realized that time machine was slightly more accurate than the TARDIS, where at least up to this point the TARDIS has only ever been able to just dematerialize and rematerialize in a random location that it supposedly chooses. This time machine was able to follow the TARDIS, therefore they speculate that perhaps they could use the Dalek ship in order to materialize back on Earth, back at home, back in their own time. And they try it and it works. And you get this really bizarre montage of them just having a ball in central London, like just riding the buses and just enjoying themselves. And the poor Doctor has to kind of watch this happen. It's worth noting, and this didn't bypass me, that they kind of writer-esque, very easy way out of their current situation blew up the Daleks time machine, so it couldn't be used again. Which is a shame. As it was happening, I was kind of thinking, no, just leave it there, because that's a story. I mean, I don't know whether there's any possibility or any argument that someone could come along and rebuild it or take parts from it and benefit from it in some way. There's something else that I completely neglected to mention, was that the TARDIS now has kind of like a window into time, which I think is I can't remember if it's like it's still part of the random setting, but it like preempts where you're going to land. I think it does, because I think that the Doctor, like, there were several times it was like, oh, it looks fine out there, and it turns out not to be. But one of them is into the Elizabethan era, and you get to see William Shakespeare, and it's very amusing that depiction of Shakespeare is completely different to the one that we see in the Shakespeare Code, David Tennant episode, but arguably far more historically accurate than the one that we got far later. It's just kind of fun. But yeah, thank you so much to listening to me ramble about Old Who. It's still fun. Still feels a bit sloggy-ish at times, but I'm still enjoying it, and would definitely recommend it to any Whovians out there who have only ever dealt with New Who. And I don't know which one. So I think Modern Who is now what New Who used to be, and New Who is Gatwa's era onwards. Clarification, please whack it in the comments. Tell me that I'm a fucking idiot, and that'll be fine. But thank you so much for watching. If you would be so inclined, please feel free to leave a like or a comment in the comment section. Hopefully when we do another podcast, if there are any comments, we'll read them out and we'll converse with you guys, because I'm interested in building a community around Doctor Who, and hopefully quite an accepting community and diverse community of individuals who just love this little show that is getting bigger and bigger each year, about a time-traveling lunatic and his friends that he encounters along the way. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Reegan, and until the next time, we are traveling into time and space.